The wind howled across the icy plains of Alaska, carrying with it a biting chill that seeped through even the thickest layers of clothing. The research facility stood alone in the vast emptiness, its metal walls creaking under the weight of snow and isolation. Inside, Dr. Emily Carter sat hunched over her desk, her eyes scanning lines of data displayed on multiple monitors. Her fingers moved swiftly across the keyboard as she entered notes, her mind racing with possibilities. Beside her, Ryan Lewis adjusted the settings on a bulky virtual reality headset. He was younger than Emily, with a mop of messy brown hair and an eager grin that hinted at his relentless curiosity. "Ready for another round?" he asked, glancing at her before turning back to the equipment. Emily nodded without looking up. "Let's do it," she said, her voice calm but firm. She leaned back slightly and watched as Ryan helped strap the headset onto their latest test subject, a volunteer named Alex. Alex was a wiry man in his late 20s, dressed in a plain gray jumpsuit. His breathing quickened as Ryan tightened the straps, anticipation flickering in his eyes. The experiment was part of a larger project exploring human responses to extreme stress. For months, Emily and Ryan had been running simulations designed to mimic life or death scenarios. Participants were placed in virtual environments where they faced threats ranging from wild animals to armed attackers. Sensors attached to their bodies tracked heart rate, brain activity, hormone levels, and other physiological markers. The goal was to understand how humans reacted when pushed to their limits and what made some people better at surviving than others. Today's session promised to be particularly intense. Ryan tapped a few buttons on the control panel, and the room dimmed as the simulation began. Through the headset, Alex found himself standing in a dark forest. Shadows loomed between the trees, and distant sounds of growling echoed around him. Suddenly, a massive bear emerged from the underbrush, its eyes gleaming with predatory intent. It charged toward him, teeth bared. Back in the lab, Emily studied the readings pouring in from Alex's sensors. His heart rate spiked almost instantly, and adrenaline surged through his system like a tidal wave. This wasn't unusual. Most participants experienced similar reactions, but something else caught her attention. A strange compound appeared in his bloodstream, one that hadn't shown up in previous tests. "What is that?" Ryan murmured, leaning closer to the screen. His brow furrowed as he tried to make sense of the data. "I don't know," Emily replied, her tone tinged with both excitement and unease. She tapped a few commands into her computer, isolating the mysterious substance for further analysis. "It's not adrenaline, but it seems to be working alongside it. Look at this spike in muscle response and cognitive function." As they spoke, Alex fought off the virtual bear with surprising strength and precision. In the simulation, he grabbed a nearby branch and swung it with enough force to send the creature stumbling backward. Then, just as quickly, he darted away, navigating the treacherous terrain with uncanny agility. When the scenario ended moments later, Alex removed the headset, panting heavily but grinning from ear to ear. "That was insane," he exclaimed, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I've never felt anything like it. It was like I could do anything." Emily exchanged a glance with Ryan. They had seen flashes of heightened performance in other subjects, but nothing quite like this. Whatever the new compound was, it seemed to amplify natural abilities far beyond normal limits. Over the next several days, Emily and Ryan ran more tests, refining their methods and gathering additional data. Each time they observed the same pattern. When participants faced imminent danger, their bodies produced the unknown substance in varying amounts. Some individuals generated more than others, and those who did often performed feats that bordered on superhuman. "It's like the body has a hidden reservoir of power," Ryan mused one evening as they reviewed the results together. "Something we didn't even realize existed until now." Emily nodded thoughtfully. "It makes sense if you think about evolution. Early humans must have needed every advantage they could get to survive predators and harsh environments. Maybe this is a remnant of that an emergency override system, buried deep within our biology. But as thrilling as the discovery was, it also raised troubling questions. If such a mechanism existed, why hadn't anyone noticed it before? And what would happen if someone figured out how to harness it artificially? Ryan's enthusiasm sometimes overshadowed these concerns. Late at night, after Emily had gone to bed, he lingered in the lab, poring over the data and tinkering with the equipment. One evening, unable to resist the urge, he decided to try the simulation himself. He strapped on the headset, set the difficulty level to maximum, and braced for whatever came next. The experience was unlike anything he'd ever felt. In the virtual world, he faced down a horde of enemies armed with nothing but a knife. Time seemed to slow as his senses sharpened, allowing him to anticipate every move. His muscles burned with energy, and his mind processed information faster than he thought possible. By the time the simulation ended, Ryan was drenched in sweat but exhilarated. He checked the readings afterward, confirming that his body had indeed produced the mysterious compound. The realization filled him with awe and a growing sense of ambition. What if he could unlock this potential permanently? What if everyone could access this hidden strength whenever they needed it? For now, though, Ryan kept his experiments secret. He knew Emily wouldn't approve of him testing on himself, especially without proper oversight. Still, the allure of the discovery gnawed at him, driving him to push boundaries he might otherwise have respected. Meanwhile, Emily grew increasingly anxious about the implications of their work. She spent hours drafting reports and encrypting files, determined to protect their findings from falling into the wrong hands. Her instincts told her that the world wasn't ready for something like this, not yet. But as much as she wanted to keep the research contained, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were sitting on a powder keg, waiting for someone to light the fuse. One fateful morning, that fear became reality. As Emily arrived at the lab, she noticed unfamiliar tire tracks leading up to the facility. Before she could investigate further, a group of armed men burst through the doors, demanding access to all their data. At the head of the intruders stood Victor Kane, a cold-eyed executive from Blackthorn Industries. His company had a reputation for exploiting scientific breakthroughs for profit, regardless of the consequences. "We know what you've discovered," Victor said, his voice dripping with menace. "And we're here to take it." Emily's heart sank as she realized the nightmare she'd dreaded was unfolding right before her eyes. With no time to waste, she grabbed a USB drive containing the most critical files and slipped it into her pocket. As chaos erupted around her, she made a split-second decision. She would escape, no matter the cost. Ryan wasn't so fortunate. Despite his protests, he was dragged away by Victor's men, leaving Emily to flee into the freezing wilderness alone. Clutching the precious data close to her chest, she vowed to do whatever it took to stop Blackthorn from exploiting their discovery. Little did she know, this was only the beginning of a battle that would test her courage, ingenuity, and humanity itself. The icy wind whipped against Emily's face as she ran through the snow-covered plains surrounding the research facility. Her breath came in ragged gasps, each step sending sharp stings of cold into her legs. Behind her, shouts echoed faintly, growing louder with every passing second. Victor Kane's men were closing in, and Emily knew she didn't have much time. Clutching the USB drive tightly in her gloved hand, she glanced over her shoulder. The dark silhouettes of armed figures emerged from the haze of falling snow, their flashlights cutting through the dim light like search beams. Panic surged within her, but she forced herself to focus. She had spent years studying survival instincts. Now was the time to rely on them. Emily veered off the main path and ducked behind a cluster of boulders. Crouching low, she listened intently as the footsteps drew nearer. Her heart pounded so loudly she feared they might hear it. For a moment, the world seemed to freeze. Then, Just as suddenly, the sounds began to fade. The men passed by without spotting her, their voices fading into the distance. Exhaling slowly, Emily allowed herself a brief moment of relief. But there was no time to rest. She needed to put as much distance between herself and Blackthorn's operatives as possible. Rising cautiously, she continued her trek across the frozen landscape, heading toward an old supply shed she remembered seeing during one of her earlier expeditions near the facility. When she finally reached the shed, Emily slipped inside and locked the door behind her. It wasn't much, a small wooden structure filled with rusted tools and crates, but it would provide temporary shelter. Shivering uncontrollably, she pulled out the USB drive and stared at it for a long moment. This tiny piece of technology held everything: months of research, countless hours of work, and potentially the key to unlocking humanity's hidden potential. If it fell into the wrong hands, the consequences could be catastrophic. Meanwhile, back at the facility, Ryan sat slumped in a chair, his wrists bound tightly with cable ties. His head throbbed from where one of the men had struck him, and his chest ached with a mix of fear and frustration. Around him, Blackthorn's team worked methodically, dismantling equipment and downloading files onto portable drives. Victor Kane stood nearby, watching with a satisfied smirk. "You should feel proud," Victor said, addressing Ryan. "Your little experiment has given us something truly remarkable." Ryan glared at him, his jaw clenched. "You don't understand what you're messing with," he spat. "This isn't some toy you can sell to the highest bidder." Victor chuckled, unfazed. "Oh, I think we understand perfectly. What you've discovered is revolutionary and profitable. Imagine soldiers who can fight harder, longer, faster. Or civilians willing to do anything to protect themselves. People will pay billions for that kind of power." "It's not about money," Ryan snapped, his voice rising despite himself. "It's about ethics. You can't just weaponize human biology like this." Victor stepped closer, his expression hardening. "Ethics are for people who can afford them. Out here, survival is all that matters." He turned away dismissively, signaling to his men to continue their work. Ryan seethed silently, his mind racing. He had always been driven by curiosity, eager to push boundaries and uncover truths. But now, staring at the destruction unfolding before him, he felt a deep sense of regret. Had his ambition led them down this dangerous path? Was there any way to undo the damage? As the hours dragged on, Ryan was taken to a makeshift holding area inside the facility. Guards stationed outside ensured he couldn't escape, though he barely had the strength to try. Exhaustion weighed heavily on him, both physical and emotional. Yet even in his darkest moments, a spark of defiance lingered. If there was a chance to stop Blackthorn, he would take it, even if it cost him everything. Back in the supply shed, Emily struggled to stay warm. Wrapping herself in an old tarp she found among the supplies, she powered up a laptop she'd brought along for emergencies. Connecting the USB drive, she began reviewing the data once more, searching for anything she might have missed. As she scrolled through the files, a troubling thought occurred to her. Blackthorn already had access to most of their research. Even if she managed to keep the USB safe, they likely had enough information to replicate the combat drugs artificially. Her stomach churned at the idea. Artificial replication carried risks far greater than natural production. In controlled settings, the body regulated the release of the compound, ensuring it only activated when absolutely necessary. Without those safeguards, artificially induced doses could overwhelm the system, leading to unpredictable and possibly deadly side effects. Still, Emily refused to give up hope. There had to be a way to counteract whatever Blackthorn planned. Perhaps she could develop an antidote or find a way to neutralize the artificial version of the drug. It wouldn't be easy, but it was worth trying. As night fell, Emily ventured cautiously out of the shed, scanning the horizon for signs of pursuit. Satisfied that the coast was clear, she made her way toward the nearest town, several miles away. Every step felt like a gamble, but staying hidden wasn't an option anymore. She needed allies, resources, and a plan. The journey was grueling. The temperature dropped dangerously low, and fatigue gnawed at her resolve. By the time she reached the outskirts of the small settlement, her body was trembling violently, and her vision blurred. Collapsing onto a bench outside a diner, she caught the attention of a passerby, a middle-aged woman named Linda. "Are you okay?" Linda asked, approaching with concern. Her coat was worn, and her face bore lines of hardship, but her eyes were kind. Emily hesitated, unsure whether to trust anyone. But desperation outweighed caution. "I need help," she admitted softly. "My name is Emily Carter. I'm a scientist, and I've uncovered something important, something dangerous." Linda studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Come with me," she said simply, helping Emily to her feet. "We'll figure this out together." Over the next few days, Emily pieced together fragments of a network dedicated to resisting corporate exploitation. Through Linda, she met Marcus Halle, a former soldier turned activist who had fought against unethical experiments in the past. His presence was commanding, his voice steady and reassuring. Beside him stood Sarah Bennett, a tech-savvy young woman whose sharp wit and resourcefulness quickly earned Emily's respect. "We've been watching Blackthorn for years," Marcus explained as they gathered in a cramped safe house. "They're ruthless, but they're not invincible. With your knowledge, we might stand a chance." Sarah leaned forward eagerly. "Tell us everything you know," she urged. "Anything that can help us shut them down." Emily hesitated, weighing her options. Trusting strangers wasn't easy, especially under these circumstances. But she recognized the determination in their eyes, the same fire that had driven her. Own research. Slowly, she began sharing her findings, explaining the nature of the combat drugs and the dangers of artificial replication, as she spoke. Ryan's fate weighed heavily on her mind. She hadn't heard from him since the raid, and the uncertainty gnawed at her. Was he still alive? Had Blackthorn hurt him? Guilt twisted in her gut, reminding her of the promise she'd made to protect her team. Now she realized protecting Ryan meant stopping Blackthorn at all costs. By the time she finished recounting her story, the group had devised a tentative plan. They would gather more intel on Blackthorn's operations, identify weaknesses in their security, and prepare for a direct confrontation. It was risky, but none of them doubted the stakes. "This isn't just about science," Marcus said firmly. "It's about humanity. We can't let greed dictate our future." Emily nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time since the raid, she allowed herself to believe that victory might be possible. Together, they would fight not just for themselves, but for everyone who deserved a better world. But as the days passed and preparations intensified, ominous reports began to surface. Blackthorn had succeeded in synthesizing a crude version of the combat drug, though their trials had yielded horrifying results. Test subjects exhibited violent behavior, accelerated aging, and in some cases, death. Despite the failures, Victor remained undeterred, convinced that perfection was within reach. Emily knew they were running out of time. If Blackthorn perfected the formula, the consequences would ripple across the globe. Entire populations could be manipulated, transformed into tools of war or oppression. The thought terrified her, fueling her resolve to act quickly. Late one evening, as the group reviewed their strategy, Sarah interrupted the discussion with alarming news. "Blackthorn's moving forward with mass production," she announced. Grimly, "They're setting up a facility in the desert. If we don't stop them soon, it'll be too late." The room fell silent, the weight of the revelation sinking in. Emily exchanged a glance with Marcus, who nodded solemnly. "Then we strike," he said, "no matter the cost." Though fear lingered in the corners of her mind, Emily felt a flicker of hope. They weren't alone anymore. Together, they would face the storm ahead and perhaps, just perhaps, change the course of history. The safe house buzzed with activity as the group prepared for their next move. Emily sat at a cluttered table, surrounded by maps, blueprints, and notes scrawled on scraps of paper. Her eyes darted between the documents, her mind racing to piece together a plan that could work. Across from her, Marcus leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his expression calm but focused. Sarah tapped furiously on her laptop, searching for any information she could find about Blackthorn's desert facility. "We need more than just brute force," Emily said finally, breaking the silence. "If we go in blindly, we'll lose before we even start." Marcus nodded in agreement. "She's right. This isn't just about guns or numbers. We need precision intelligence, timing, and a way to disable whatever they're building without causing unnecessary harm." Sarah looked up from her screen. "I've been digging into their communications," she explained. "It's not easy, they're encrypted like crazy, but I think I've found something. They're rushing production, which means the facility might still have weak points. If we can get inside and sabotage their equipment, we might be able to stop them." Emily frowned. "Sabotage sounds risky. What if someone gets hurt? Or worse, what if we trigger the release of the drug accidentally?" "It's a calculated risk," Marcus replied firmly. "We don't have the luxury of waiting. Every day they stay operational is another day closer to disaster." The tension in the room was palpable. Emily knew Marcus was right, but the thought of putting lives on the line filled her with dread. She had always been cautious, methodical, and careful. Now she was being asked to gamble everything on a single desperate attempt. "Okay," she said after a long pause. "But we need a backup plan. If things go wrong, we need a way out." Marcus smiled faintly. "That's why you're here, Doc. You're the brains of this operation. We'll handle the muscle." As the days passed, the group worked tirelessly to refine their strategy. Emily spent hours analyzing the data she had saved on the USB drive, looking for vulnerabilities in the combat drug's chemical structure. If she could identify a flaw in its composition, they might be able to create a counteragent, a way to neutralize the effects of the artificial version. In the meantime, Sarah continued hacking into Blackthorn's systems, gathering intel on the layout of the desert facility and the routines of its guards. She discovered that the compound was heavily fortified, with multiple layers of security and armed patrols. Breaking in would be nearly impossible without help from the inside. "We need someone on the ground," Sarah announced during one of their planning sessions. "Someone who knows the place, or at least has access." Emily stiffened at the bosomed suggestion. The only person who fit that description was Ryan. But how could they reach him? And even if they did, would he be willing or able to assist them? "I'll do it," Marcus volunteered suddenly. "I can pose as a contractor or technician. They're hiring fast, judging by the chatter online. It shouldn't be too hard to slip in unnoticed." "No," Emily said sharply. "It's too dangerous if they catch you." "They won't," Marcus interrupted, his tone firm. "I've done this kind of thing before, trust me." Reluctantly, Emily agreed. They couldn't afford to hesitate any longer. While Marcus made preparations to infiltrate the facility, Sarah trained a small team of volunteers in basic combat techniques. Most of them were ordinary people, locals who had joined the resistance after learning about Blackthorn's crimes. Though inexperienced, they were determined to fight back. One evening, as the group gathered for a final briefing, tensions ran high. Emily reviewed the plan one last time, emphasizing the importance of coordination and timing. "Remember," she said, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach, "this isn't just about stopping Blackthorn. It's about showing the world that we can stand up to corruption, that we can protect each other." Her words seemed to bolster everyone's spirits, at least temporarily. But as the meeting ended and the others dispersed, Emily remained seated, staring at the map spread out before her. Doubts gnawed at her resolve. What if they failed? What if Victor Kane succeeded in unleashing the drug on an unsuspecting population? Meanwhile, deep within Blackthorn's desert facility, Ryan endured a living nightmare. After his capture, he had been subjected to endless interrogations and invasive tests. His captors injected him with experimental doses of the artificial combat drug, monitoring his reactions with cold detachment. Each dose left him weaker, his body struggling to cope with the unnatural strain. Despite the pain, Ryan refused to give up. He clung to the hope that Emily was still out there, fighting to stop Blackthorn. That belief kept him going, even when the darkness threatened to consume him. One night, as he lay on a metal cot in his cell, a guard entered carrying a tray of food. Ryan barely glanced at the man, assuming it was just another routine check. But then the guard whispered urgently, "Listen carefully. There are people coming for you." Ryan's heart leapt. "Who?" he demanded, his voice hoarse from disuse. "No." "Time to explain," the guard replied. "Just be ready. They'll make their move soon." Before Ryan could ask anything else, the guard turned and left, leaving him alone with his thoughts. Hope surged within him, fragile but undeniable. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to imagine freedom and revenge. Back at the safe house, Marcus prepared for his mission. Dressed in plain clothes and carrying forged identification papers, he boarded a bus heading toward the desert. As the vehicle rumbled along dusty roads, he rehearsed his cover story in his head. He was posing as a maintenance worker hired to repair faulty machinery in the facility. It wasn't a glamorous role, but it would get him inside. When he arrived at the compound, Marcus presented his credentials to the gate guards, who waved him through without much scrutiny. Inside, the facility was eerily quiet, save for the hum of machinery and the occasional bark of orders from supervisors. Keeping his head down, Marcus followed the directions he'd memorized. Making his way to the section where production equipment was housed, he quickly realized the scope of Blackthorn's operation. Rows of vats and pipes stretched across the room, churning out batches of the artificial combat drug. Workers moved mechanically, their faces pale and hollow-eyed. Whatever Victor Kane was doing to them, it wasn't voluntary. Marcus slipped into a storage closet, pulling out a small device Sarah had given him. It was a disruptor designed to overload the facility's power grid, shutting down production temporarily. Activating it required precise timing. He needed to ensure the rest of the team was in position before triggering the blackout. As he waited, his thoughts drifted to Emily and the others. He hoped they were ready. This was their best chance, and failure wasn't an option. At the edge of the desert, the resistance team assembled under cover of darkness. Emily stood beside Sarah, gripping a flashlight tightly. Around them, volunteers checked their gear, their expressions tense but resolute. When the signal came, a brief flash of light from Marcus's location, they would move in, breaching the perimeter and creating enough chaos to distract Blackthorn's forces. Hours ticked by agonizingly slowly. Finally, a faint glow appeared in the distance. Without hesitation, Emily gave the order, "Go!" She shouted, her voice cutting through the night. The team sprang into action, moving swiftly across the sand. Gunfire erupted almost immediately as guards spotted them, but the resistance pressed forward, driven by sheer determination. Explosions lit up the sky as Sarah detonated pre-placed charges, disabling sections of the outer wall. Inside the facility, alarms blared and lights flickered ominously. Marcus seized the moment, activating the disruptor. The hum of machinery sputtered and died, plunging the compound into darkness. Chaos erupted as workers stumbled blindly, and guards scrambled to regain control. Amid the confusion, Marcus located Ryan's cell. Using a set of lockpicks, he freed his friend, who staggered out, weak but alive. "You came," Ryan whispered, his voice trembling with gratitude. "Of course," Marcus replied gruffly. "Now let's finish this." Together, they rejoined the fray, joining forces with Emily and the others as they fought to dismantle Blackthorns. Operation. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, victory felt within reach. The desert facility was a war zone. Gunfire echoed through the corridors, mingling with the shouts of guards and the panicked cries of workers. Smoke filled the air, stinging eyes and making it hard to breathe. Emily moved cautiously, her heart pounding as she followed Marcus and Ryan deeper into the chaos. The resistance team had breached the outer walls, but now they faced the real challenge, reaching the central lab where Blackthorn's production equipment and Victor Kane were located. "We need to stay together," Marcus hissed, glancing over his shoulder at Emily and Ryan. "If we split up, we're dead." Emily nodded, clutching a small device in her hand. It was a prototype neutralizer she had built using the data from the USB drive. If everything went according to plan, it could disable the artificial combat drug permanently. But getting close enough to use it would be nearly impossible. As they navigated the labyrinthine halls, Ryan stumbled, his legs still weak from weeks of captivity. Marcus caught him before he fell, steadying him with a firm grip. "You good?" he asked, his voice low. "I'm fine," Ryan muttered, though his pale face told a different story. Despite his condition, he pushed forward, determined to see this through. He owed it to himself, and to everyone who had suffered because of Blackthorn's greed. Meanwhile, Sarah coordinated the resistance team from outside the facility. Hunched over her laptop, she monitored security cameras and relayed updates to the others via encrypted radios. "They've sealed off the main entrance," she announced, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "You'll have to find another way in." "Copy that," Marcus replied, his voice crackling over the radio. "We're heading to the service tunnels now." The group doubled back, slipping into a narrow passageway hidden behind a maintenance door. The air grew colder as they descended, the sound of their footsteps echoing eerily in the confined space. Emily shone her flashlight ahead, illuminating rusted pipes and exposed wiring. Every step felt like a gamble, but there was no turning back now. "This should take us closer to the lab," Marcus said, consulting a crude map he'd memorized earlier. "But watch out for traps. They'll expect us to come this way." "Sure." Enough. As they rounded a corner, they encountered a makeshift barricade. Barrels and debris blocked the path, forcing them to climb over carefully. Emily went first, her movements slow and deliberate. She froze when she heard a faint click beneath her foot. "Trap!" she whispered urgently, dropping to the ground. Just as a burst of sparks shot out from the wall, the others followed suit, narrowly avoiding the electrified wires snaking across the floor. "Nice catch," Marcus said, giving her a quick nod of approval. "Keep your eyes open." In the central lab, Victor Kane watched the unfolding chaos on a bank of monitors. His expression remained calm, almost amused, as he observed the resistance fighters battling their way toward him. He sipped from a glass of whiskey, seemingly unconcerned about the destruction around him. "They're persistent. I'll give them that," he remarked to one of his lieutenants, a burly man named Greg. "But persistence won't save them." Greg shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, maybe we should evacuate." "The facility's compromised." Victor waved him off dismissively. "And leave my life's work in the hands of amateurs? Not a chance. Besides, I've already initiated the final phase. Once the aerosol dispersal system activates, it won't matter who's left standing." Greg paled visibly. "You're really going through with it? Even if it means killing everyone here?" Victor smirked. "Sacrifices must be made for progress. Now go make yourself useful and hold them off as long as you can." As Greg hurried away, Victor turned back to the monitors, his gaze lingering on Emily. There was something about her determination, her intelligence, that intrigued him. He wondered how far she would go to stop him. Would she risk her own life, or would she crumble under the pressure? Back in the tunnels, the group reached a junction. Two paths stretched before them, both leading toward the lab, but from different directions. Marcus hesitated, unsure which route to take. "We don't have time to guess," he muttered, frustration creeping into his voice. Ryan stepped forward, studying the layout. "Let me check," he said, pulling out a handheld scanner he'd taken from one of the guards. After a moment, he pointed to the left passage. "This one's less guarded. We should go this way." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You sure? It's our best shot," Ryan replied firmly. "Trust me." With no other options, they followed Ryan's lead. The tunnel twisted and turned, growing narrower with each step. At one point, they passed a group of terrified workers huddled together, their faces gaunt and hollow. Emily stopped briefly, offering what little reassurance she could. "You're safe now," she told them softly. "Get out while you can." The workers nodded gratefully, scurrying past her toward the exit. Emily watched them go, hoping they would make it out alive. Then she turned back to the task at hand, steeling herself for what lay ahead. Finally, they reached the entrance to the central lab. A heavy metal door stood between them and their goal, locked with a biometric scanner. Marcus cursed under his breath. "We'll never get through that without clearance." Emily stepped forward, examining the scanner closely. "Maybe we don't need clearance," she said, pulling out a small tool kit. "Give me a minute." Her hands trembled slightly as she worked, but her focus never wavered. Within moments, the lock clicked open, and the door slid aside with a soft hiss. Beyond it, the lab sprawled out like a fortress of science and technology. Rows of machines hummed steadily, feeding vats of glowing liquid, the artificial combat. Drug into a massive dispersal system mounted on the ceiling. Victor stood in the center of the room, waiting for them. In one hand, he held a remote control. In the other, a pistol aimed directly at Emily. Well, he said, his tone dripping with mockery. "Look who decided to join the party." Marcus raised his weapon instinctively, but Victor shook his head. "I wouldn't do that if I were you. One wrong move, and I activate the dispersal system. You'll all become guinea pigs for my experiment." Emily swallowed hard, forcing herself to remain calm. "You don't have to do this," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "You're playing with forces you don't understand. People will die not just here, but everywhere." Victor chuckled darkly. "People always die. It's the price of evolution. But imagine the survivors, the strongest, the smartest, the most capable. Isn't that worth a little sacrifice?" "It's not evolution," Emily shot back. "It's manipulation. And it's wrong." For a brief moment, Victor's mask of confidence slipped, revealing a flicker of doubt. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared. "Enough talk," he snapped. "Drop your weapons, or I press the button." Tension hung thick in the air as Marcus slowly lowered his gun. Ryan did the same, his jaw clenched in frustration. Emily, however, didn't move. Instead, she tightened her grip on the neutralizer, calculating her next move. "Fine," she said finally, raising her hands slightly. "But let me ask you something. What happens when the drug wears off? When the superhumans you create collapse from exhaustion or burn out completely? Will you keep pumping them full of chemicals until there's nothing left?" Victor's finger hovered over the remote, uncertainty flashing in his eyes. For the first time, he seemed unsure of himself. Seizing the opportunity, Emily lunged forward, activating the neutralizer. A pulse of energy surged outward, enveloping the lab in a blinding light. When the glow faded, the machines had fallen silent. The vats of liquid sat empty, their contents neutralized. Victor stared at the scene in disbelief, his plans crumbling before his eyes. "No," he whispered, sinking to his knees. "No." Before he could react further, Marcus tackled him to the ground, pinning him down as Ryan secured his hands with zip ties. The battle was over, but the aftermath was only beginning. As the resistance regrouped outside the facility, the weight of what they had accomplished began to sink in. Blackthorn's operation was crippled, and Victor Kane was in custody. But the scars of the fight lingered, both physical and emotional. Emily stood apart from the others, gazing at the horizon. The sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to feel a glimmer of hope. They had stopped Blackthorn, but the world still needed answers, and she knew it was up to her to provide them. The desert stretched endlessly around them, the morning sun casting long shadows over the battered resistance fighters. Smoke still rose from the ruins of Blackthorn's facility, a stark reminder of the battle they had just fought. Emily sat on a rock, her hands trembling as she clutched the neutralizer device. It was hard to believe that such a small object had stopped something so monstrous. The artificial combat drug was gone for now, but the cost of victory weighed heavily on her mind. Marcus approached her quietly, his boots crunching against the gravel. "You did it," he said, his voice low but filled with admiration. "We couldn't have done this without you." Emily shook her head, unable to accept the praise. "It doesn't feel like a win," she admitted softly. "Too many people got hurt. Too many lives were lost." Marcus sighed, sitting down beside her. "I know, but we've bought ourselves some time. That's more than we had before." Ryan limped over, leaning heavily on a makeshift crutch. His face was pale, and dark circles ringed his eyes, but there was a flicker of determination in his expression. "What happens now?" he asked. "Victor's in custody, but Blackthorn won't just disappear. They'll try again, maybe somewhere else, with someone else." "He's right," Sarah chimed in, joining the group. She held her laptop under one arm, its screen displaying news alerts about the raid. Blackthorn's not the only company out there looking for the next big breakthrough. If word gets out about what we discovered, others will follow in their footsteps. Emily frowned, staring at the ground. She knew they were right. Stopping Victor Kane was only the first step. The knowledge of the combat drug's existence was too valuable and too dangerous to ignore. If it fell into the wrong hands again, the consequences could be even worse. "We need to expose the truth," Emily said finally, lifting her head. "Not just about Blackthorn, but about everything, the experiments, the risks, the ethics. People deserve to know what's at stake." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "I can help with that. I've already started compiling evidence, emails, documents, footage from inside the facility. If we release it publicly, it could spark a global conversation. But we have to be careful," Marcus warned. "Blackthorn has connections everywhere. If they find out we're planning to go public, they'll come after us." "That's why we need to act fast," Emily replied firmly. "And we need allies, people who can protect us while we spread the message." Over the next few days, the group worked tirelessly to gather and organize the evidence Sarah had collected. They set up a temporary base in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, far enough from Blackthorn's reach to feel safe, at least for now. Emily spent hours reviewing files, ensuring every detail was accurate. Ryan helped where he could, though his injuries often left him exhausted. Despite his weakened state, he refused to sit idle, determined to make up for the role he felt he'd played in Blackthorn's experiments. As they prepared to share their findings, tensions began to rise within the group. Some members argued for a cautious approach, releasing the information gradually to avoid backlash. Others pushed for immediate action, fearing that delays would give Blackthorn time to regroup. The debate grew heated, with voices raised and tempers flaring. "We can't afford to wait," Sarah insisted during one particularly intense meeting. "Every second we hesitate gives them another chance to cover their tracks. And rushing in blind could get us killed or worse," Marcus countered. We need a strategy. A plan that minimizes risk while maximizing impact. Emily listened silently, weighing both sides. She understood Sarah's urgency, but she also saw the wisdom in Marcus's caution. Finally, she stepped forward, raising her hands to quiet the room. "We'll split the difference," she announced. "We'll release part of the evidence. Now enough to draw attention and put pressure on Blackthorn. But we'll hold back the most sensitive details until we're ready to reveal everything. That way, we can control the narrative and keep ourselves safe." The group reluctantly agreed, though unease lingered in the air. Trust was fragile, especially in situations like this. Everyone had sacrificed so much, and the stakes were higher than ever. Meanwhile, Victor Kane sat in a holding cell, his once imposing presence reduced to that of a broken man. Handcuffed and disheveled, he stared blankly at the wall, his mind racing with thoughts of revenge. Guards stood watch outside his door, but he paid them little attention. He knew it was only a matter of time before someone came to bail him out or break him free. Sure enough, late one night, a shadowy figure appeared in the corridor. Dressed in a black suit, Greg, the same lieutenant who had served under Victor, approached the cell with a grim smile. "You didn't think we'd leave you here, did you?" Greg murmured, unlocking the door. "Blackthorn may have fallen, but the board still believes in your vision. They've authorized a rescue mission." Victor smirked, rising slowly to his feet. "Good. I knew I could count on you." Greg handed him a folder containing new plans. "We've identified a smaller facility in South America. Less visible, easier to defend. With your expertise, we can rebuild everything and finish what we started." Victor's eyes gleamed with renewed purpose. "Perfect. Let's get to work." Back at the warehouse, the resistance team launched the first phase of their exposure campaign. Using encrypted channels, they leaked key documents to journalists and whistleblower organizations. Within hours, the story exploded across social media, sparking outrage and calls for accountability. News outlets picked up the reports, shining a spotlight on Blackthorn's unethical practices and the dangers of weaponizing human biology. Response was overwhelming. Protesters gathered outside Blackthorn's headquarters, demanding justice for the victims of their experiments. Politicians issued statements condemning the company's actions, promising investigations and reforms. For the first time, it seemed like the tide was turning, but beneath the surface, cracks began to form. Among the resistance members, suspicions arose about leaks within their ranks. Sarah noticed strange activity on her computer, a file accessed without authorization, messages sent to unknown recipients. At first, she dismissed it as paranoia, but the signs grew harder to ignore. One evening, as the group reviewed their progress, Emily confronted Daniel Ross, a biologist who had joined them early on. "I need to ask you something," she said, her tone calm but firm. "Have you been sharing our data with anyone?" Daniel hesitated, his face paling. "What? No, of course not." "Why would you think that?" "Because someone is," Emily replied, holding up a printout of encrypted messages intercepted by Sarah. "These came from your account." For a moment, silence filled the room. Then Daniel sighed, lowering his gaze. "Okay, fine. I've been talking to someone. But it wasn't my choice. They threatened my family, my wife and kids. I didn't have a choice." Anger rippled through the group, but Emily forced herself to stay composed. "Who were you talking to?" she asked, her voice tight with restraint. "Blackthorn," Daniel admitted. "They promised to leave my family alone if I cooperated." "I'm sorry, I never meant for any of this to happen." Marcus stepped forward, his fists clenched. "You betrayed us. Do you realize how many lives are at risk because of you?" Before anyone could react further, Ryan spoke up, his voice surprisingly steady. "We don't have time for this," he said. "If Blackthorn knows what we're doing, they'll move faster." We need to decide now, do we turn him in or use him to feed them false information? The suggestion hung in the air, shocking everyone, including Daniel. Emily considered it carefully, weighing the risks. It was risky, but it might buy them the time they needed. "All right," she said finally. "Here's what we'll do." Over the next week, the group devised a plan to mislead Blackthorn. Under close supervision, Daniel sent altered data to his contacts, feeding them misinformation about the neutralizer and the remaining evidence. Meanwhile, Emily and Sarah worked on finalizing their full report, preparing to release it at a press conference scheduled for the following month. The deception seemed to work, at least for a while. Blackthorn's operatives focused their efforts on chasing phantom leads, buying the resistance valuable time. But the tension within the group remained high. None of them trusted Daniel completely, and the stress of maintaining the charade took its toll. One night, as Emily lay awake in her makeshift bed, she found herself thinking about Victor Kane. What was he planning? Had he truly given up? Or was he biding his time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike? Her thoughts turned to Ryan, who slept fitfully nearby. He had been through so much, yet he refused to give in to despair. His resilience inspired her, reminding her of why they were fighting in the first place. Tomorrow, she told herself, they would take the next step. Together, they would face whatever came their way and hope that humanity's better instincts would prevail. The morning of the press conference arrived, and the atmosphere was tense. Emily stood backstage at a small auditorium in the city, pacing nervously as she waited for her cue to speak. The room buzzed with reporters, activists, and concerned citizens, all eager to hear what she had to say. Sarah sat nearby, typing furiously on her laptop, making last-minute adjustments to the presentation slides. Marcus leaned against the wall, his arms crossed, scanning the crowd for any signs of trouble. Ryan sat quietly in a corner, his face pale but determined. Despite his injuries, he had insisted on being there. "This is my fight too," he had said firmly when Emily suggested he stay behind. Now, as the minutes ticked by, he gripped the armrests of his chair tightly, steeling himself for what was to come. "Ready?" Sarah asked, looking up from her screen. Emily took a deep breath. "As ready as I'll ever be." When Emily stepped onto the stage, the room fell silent. All eyes turned to her as she approached the podium, clutching a folder filled with documents and photographs. For a moment, she hesitated, overwhelmed by the weight of the moment. Then she straightened her shoulders and began to speak. "My name is Dr. Emily Carter," she said, her voice steady despite the nerves coursing through her. "What I'm about to share with you today is not easy to hear. It's a story of greed, exploitation, and the dangers of playing God with human biology." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "Months ago, my team discovered something extraordinary. Under extreme stress, some humans produce a natural compound that enhances physical and mental abilities. This discovery has the potential to revolutionize medicine for good or for ill, but instead of using it responsibly, Blackthorn Industries sought to weaponize it, creating an artificial version of the drug that could turn people into uncontrollable weapons." As she spoke, images flashed on the screen behind her, photos of the desert facility, graphs showing the effects of the drug, and videos of test subjects writhing in agony. Gasps rippled through the audience, followed by murmurs of disbelief and outrage. "We stopped them once," Emily continued, her voice growing stronger. "But they're still out there, plotting their next move. That's why we need your help. We need to demand accountability, not just from Blackthorn, but from every corporation and government agency that values profit over ethics. Together, we can ensure that this kind of abuse never happens again." The applause that followed was thunderous, filling the room with a sense of hope and determination. Reporters rushed forward, shouting questions, while activists cheered and raised banners calling for justice. For the first time in weeks, Emily allowed herself to believe that change was possible, but even as the world reacted to her words, danger loomed on the horizon. In South America, Victor Kane oversaw the construction of a new facility, hidden deep within the jungle. Workers labored tirelessly under armed guard, assembling equipment and testing prototypes. Greg stood beside Victor, reporting on the progress. "They've released the evidence," Greg said grimly, holding up a tablet displaying news headlines. "It's only a matter of time before authorities start digging deeper." Victor smirked, unfazed. "Let them dig. By the time they find us, it'll be too late. Our new dispersal system is nearly complete. Once activated, it will release the aerosolized drug across multiple cities simultaneously. No one will see it coming." Greg hesitated, unease flickering in his eyes. "And if something goes wrong? If the drug causes the same side effects as before?" Victor's expression hardened. "Then sacrifices must be made. Progress always comes at a cost." Back in the city, the resistance team celebrated their victory cautiously. They knew the battle wasn't over, but for now, they allowed themselves a moment of relief. Emily joined Sarah and Marcus at a cafe near the auditorium, sipping coffee as they discussed their next steps. "What do we do now?" Sarah asked, leaning back in her chair. "We've exposed Blackthorn, but Victor's still out there. And who knows how many others are following in his footsteps." "We keep fighting," Marcus replied firmly. "One step at a time. The public is on our side now. That gives us leverage." Ryan nodded, though his thoughts were elsewhere. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something, a piece of the puzzle that hadn't clicked into place yet. As much as he wanted to trust their success, he knew better than anyone how relentless Victor could be. That night, as Emily prepared to leave the safe house, she received an unexpected message. A journalist named Linda, the same woman who had helped her after the raid, had uncovered information about Victor's new location. The coordinates pointed to a remote area in the Amazon rainforest. "This is it," Emily said, showing the map to Marcus and Ryan. "Our chance to finish this once and for all." Marcus studied the map carefully. "It won't be easy. Getting in and out undetected will take planning and luck." "We don't have a choice," Emily replied. "If we let him activate that system, millions of lives will be at risk." Ryan clenched his fists, his resolve hardening. "Then let's do it, whatever it takes." The journey to the Amazon was grueling. Thick vegetation slowed their progress, and the humid air made every step feel heavier. Armed with makeshift gear and limited supplies, the team pushed forward, guided by Sarah's intel and Linda's maps. Along the way, they encountered traces of Blackthorn's presence, abandoned campsites, discarded equipment, and ominous warning signs posted along the trail. Finally, after days of travel, they reached the facility. Hidden beneath a canopy of trees, it blended seamlessly into the jungle, its walls camouflaged with vines and moss. Guards patrolled the perimeter, their movements sharp and alert. "We'll split up," Marcus whispered, crouching behind a fallen log. "Ryan and I will create a distraction. Emily, you find the control room and disable the system." Emily nodded, though fear gnawed at her stomach. "Be careful," she said softly. As Marcus and Ryan moved into position, Emily slipped through the underbrush, heading toward the heart of the facility. Her heart pounded as she dodged guards and avoided detection, relying on instinct and training to guide her. When she finally reached the control room, she found it deserted, the machinery humming steadily. Pulling out the neutralizer device, she activated it, aiming it at the central console. A pulse of energy surged outward, shutting down the equipment instantly. Alarms blared throughout the facility, and chaos erupted as workers scrambled to respond. Outside, Marcus and Ryan ignited a series of small explosions, drawing attention. Away from Emily, gunfire echoed through the jungle as guards gave chase, but the resistance fighters held their ground. Buying Emily precious time. In the control room, Victor Kane appeared, his face twisted with rage. "You think you've won?" he snarled, raising a pistol. "You're too late." Before he could fire, Ryan burst in, tackling him to the ground. The two men struggled fiercely, trading blows as the room shook with the sound of collapsing machinery. With a final surge of strength, Ryan disarmed Victor, pinning him down as Marcus entered the room. "It's over," Marcus said coldly, securing Victor's hands with zip ties. Victor laughed bitterly, blood trickling from his lip. "You'll never stop it. There will always be someone willing to push the limits." "Maybe," Emily replied, stepping forward, "but not today." Weeks later, the world began to heal. Blackthorn Industries was dismantled, its executives arrested and prosecuted. Global reforms were implemented to prevent similar abuses in the future. Emily published her research openly, emphasizing the importance of ethical boundaries and responsible science. Ryan returned to civilian life, seeking peace in a quiet town far from the chaos. Though scarred by his experiences, he found solace in helping others recover from trauma. Sarah became a prominent advocate for transparency and accountability, working tirelessly to expose corruption wherever it lurked. Marcus disappeared into the shadows, vowing to continue protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. As for Emily, she reflected on everything that had happened, the sacrifices, the victories, the losses. Humanity's greatest strength, she realized, lay not in unnatural enhancements, but in its ability to adapt, persevere, and unite. Though the scars of the past remained, she found hope in knowing that the future was still theirs to shape. And so, the story ended not with a bang, but with a quiet promise. A promise that no matter how dark the world became, there would always be those willing to stand in the light.